Time in the round, but the answer to your question is we haven't formally decided, but it's looking more like a round table, I would say.
Oh, okay, good. Can I ask when that's decided that the programme can be updated and perhaps with indicative time estimates?
Sure, so yes.
As well. Thank you for that. Now, before we start with your main witness, I know there's one or two people who've come here who want to speak. Are they here? Mr. Rhys-Jones?
Yes.
Would you like to address the inquiry? Would you like to pop up to the front here? And
Right, yes.
Everyone can. Do you mind all the trip hazards? Yes, that's the better way around.
All right, good. Good morning. Where would you like me to stand?
Sit or stand there. We
Right.
had both yesterday, so we
Oh,
you more.
okay, well, I'll probably sit because I'm just got a few notes here.
Right.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Shall I just
Fire away.
I'll fire away. I'm speaking here really with three hats on. First of all, I've lived in the area as a resident for getting on for 30 years now, and I chose to live in central London because it's very close to where I work, and so I count myself as being much the greener resident in London because I walk everywhere and I use public transport, and so it's an issue that matters to me, and it matters very much. I may say so, to the local residents who have to cross Oxford Street virtually every day. I literally used to live in Fitzroy Square, which is about 200 yards, and now I live in Bloomsbury, so I'm living at the other end. So first of all, as a resident, I wanted to say that I read the architect and Marks and Spencer's evidence with a lot of interest, and I can see the ambitions. So, but I wanted to say that I don't recognise at all the assessment of Orchard House as being a sort of, I think in one, not in that evidence, but somewhere else, I read somewhere that somebody described it as a crap building, which it certainly is not. And I would say it was a particularly handsome building. What I notice in the evidence is that there aren't many pictures of Orchard House itself. And it's Orchard House that I would focus on and say that if you look at Said's evidence, you'll see a lot of pictures of Orchard House, and you'll notice, first of all, that it's a very handsome building, that it's a building of its period, that it has heritage status, that although I admire the idea of an imaginative response coming to Oxford Street to build new places, I would say that any new imaginative building should not really be put in there at the expense of an existing imaginative building. And just before we get on to the idea of green issues, there is an embodied design and historic imagination in that building as it stands, which we can never get back. So although it isn't listed, it has, and it may not be listed because of alterations to it made so that it doesn't have the integrity of being a single architect building. It's also true to say that many of our heritage assets and characterful assets have had changes made to them. You only have to look at any cathedral to realise that a building changes through its history. It may not, therefore, become a grade 1 or grade 2 star listed building, but it has essential character and essential value. And I would count it a great pity to lose that, because if you look along the street, as I did just the other day, you'll see that it's the sort of complementary to Selfridges, which is a highly regarded building, and complementary to the street, to Oxford Street itself. And so I think it would be a great disappointment to see that building taken away. But there's another reason for that, because I'm going to put on my Victorian Society president hat and say we can't think of buildings as simply being totally in isolation. The character of an area is really important. There's been a claim that these big changes will somehow enhance the public realm and the idea of listed buildings around it. And I cannot subscribe to the notion. I think it renders itself absurd. You can't destroy a heritage asset to improve other heritage assets. It's as simple as that. You have to accept that all the areas of heritage in that streetscape around that area are of value, and they contribute to a whole. Now, I'm going to put on finally my other hat, which is to say, through Civic Voice, I become involved in a lot of cities across England in particular. And I see the deleterious effect of an assumption about open air high streets, which is still current in public thinking. That is that we Canute-like can stop the ebbing of a retail tide. Bypasses, Westfield, the internet and online are threatening retail. And the retail that is surviving is retail that makes itself into a destination for shoppers. And the evidence is across Britain that over bigging up and expanding the development of high streets is leading to their decay. And whether you go to Ipswich or Swindon or Leeds, even the quite successful cities, you find that the option of a city centre with expanding retail is one that needs to be very cautiously approached. It's not a green policy to encourage people to come into town and then leave town every day. It's actually greener to accept that, to give the suburbs power. I think a lot of the retrofit problems are not related to the possibilities of this building as a recycled building, but actually concerned with the idea of making a much bigger floor space, which involves offices. If I were to go to shopping there, which I do, I would venture, and this is not an insult, that Marks and Spencers are not using that space as in a very imaginative way compared with the possibilities that an old building gives them. There are plenty of old buildings which retailers seek and want, and I can only talk at the moment about the most expensive shop I've ever visited, department store, which is the Dover Street Market, which has moved to central London, just off Piccadilly and down there, and they're using an old bank, and they use the bank to actually imaginatively sell the most expensive clothes I have ever seen. So in other words, the idea that somehow you can only sell your goods in a modern environment is just doesn't hold water, I'm afraid. I think that this is an opportunity to recycle this building in this area. I really think that sending that message that recycling is our aim, and reuse is something that is important, should be important to any retailer who uses less. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
No, thank you, sir. We'll deal with those things in evidence, as you be aware.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming here and your evidence.
Thank you very much.
Did anyone else wish to speak this morning? You're right.
Yeah, right. Right, I'm just checking.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Harris, please introduce your first.
Thank you, sir. You should have, and I think you've got the core documents online.
I have.
You should have the proof of evidence of Mr. Pilbrow. It would also be useful, sir, if you could have to hand the rebuttal proof of evidence of Mr. Simon Sturgis, as referred to in opening. That's CD 917, and in particular, the representation of the comprehensive refurbishment that was submitted with that from page 22 onward. As I mentioned, I think yesterday, but certainly today, we're hoping to put the images on the screen immediately behind you.
So you want me to move?
Yes. Please.
Okay, I shall do that.
And so we're going to follow the approach with which you're familiar. I think it goes back now more than a decade of really getting the architect to present the scheme without interruption from lawyer.
Okay. Wires.
All right, formalities first, Mr. Pilbrow. Are you Fred Pilbrow?
Yeah.
Good answer. All right. Would you please be expected to be settled? Good. Can we over to you? Is really the day. Explain to the inspector what it is you want to say about the project.
Thanks, Russell. My colleague Carolina is going to click for me, sir, if I might. and I will stay seated, but I'll probably leap up with excitement. I'm an architect. I've been qualified for 30 years. I think for me, the central challenge of architecture, both its pleasure and at times its frustration, is that we need to deliver a single solution on a site. A single solution that must respond to all of the nefarious challenges, opportunities, and constraints of each individual site. And we approach that task on a site-by-site basis. We don't come with preconceptions about the right solutions. As I'll show you, we do refurbishment, we do new build. But in the end, it needs to be one solution that best balances those different constraints and opportunities. And at Oxford Street, certainly that includes a client brief, M&S, who, as you heard yesterday, want to stay on this site, and our proposals deliver a long-term future for them on Oxford Street. But our obligations are wider. We must look at the site's potential, as policy requires us to do, how it must be optimized, how we must address considerations of heritage, and we'll talk in detail about those this morning, and how we address considerations of sustainability. In every decision we made on this project, and every decision we make on any of the projects my office designs, has sustainability at its core. We're not new to that party. The image on the central, go back. The image on the center of the screen is a library I designed for the University of Oxford, which opened in 1998. Bill Clinton opened it. It's the Rothermere American Institute. And it's set next to two Grade 1 listed buildings. So it deals with heritage sensitivities, but it's also very advanced in its environmental credentials. We use thermal mass of the vaulted concrete superstructure. We use the vaulted mass of the books, and we ally that to night purge ventilation, drawing cool night air in and to a lantern at the top of the library. That has no air conditioning. It's entirely a naturally ventilated building, and students come here even in the summer months because it's a cool and refreshing place to work. On our trip yesterday, I think I intimated we've got a long experience of working in Westminster, both doing new and refurbished buildings. This is Ingram House in the Adelphi Conservation Area, a rather unlovely 1960s office building that we did a cut and carve refurbishment to deliver residential sitting atop a plinth of offices. More locally to the site and critical to, I think, the conversation we're going to have this morning is the Elizabeth line. And I designed the overstation development above Bond Street, Crossrail West, to give it its full title, whilst I was a partner at KPF, and it moved with me when I moved to set up PLP architecture in 2012. Rather by good timing, it opened this week. And this is a fundamental part of the conversation about 458 Oxford Street. I don't have the embodied carbon that was invested in this piece of infrastructure, but it runs into the millions of tons. And what it is an investment to deliver what I think is fundamental to our move to net zero. Compact, efficient cities reliant on public transport, not private car usage. Intensification at the core, not sprawl to the suburbs. And when we look at the site, which is within 5 minutes of this Crossrail station, when we look at 458 Oxford Street, we're looking at a site which is perfectly placed to deliver on those goals, to optimize development, as Russell in his opening remarks explained. Walk down Davis Street and I can show you a finished building that I completed in 1998, 21 Davis Street. And I think it touches on another conversation that we'll have today, which is about circular economies. And I think a key strand of that is long life, high quality, durable, and long life buildings. So the facade on this building is what, nearly 25 years old. It hasn't been replaced. It's still looking good. Simon and I have debated a number of points on this project, but what we agree on is that we're not going to change the facade on 458 Oxford Street after 25 years. And this building talks to the quality of what we deliver and its durability and its long life. So in 2013, I set up my own practice, with 5 fellow partners. And this is us 3 years later, proudly sitting in front of our first completed building, the Waterman down at Greenwich for Night Dragon. And in the intervening 9 years, we've been privileged to work for a wide range of clients, private sector and public sector clients. This is a project I'm particularly proud of. It's in the specialist ear, nose and throat hospital that we designed for University College London. It sits in the heart of the Bloomsbury Conservation Area. It's a modern building, but sensitive to its setting. It's also a building that speaks about the life within the building. So patients faced with the unpleasant task of going to their dentist do at least get to circulate in the daylight. There are waiting areas in these bay windows screened by perforated brick that filters the light to the interior. And I said we are passionate about sustainability. And for me, this project, which we designed for Dutch developers, Edge Technology, and they're internationally renowned for being at the very cutting edge of the best sustainability and the best well-being. We're designing their first UK project, and they picked us because as a practice, we developed our own in-house resources for environmental analysis, and we integrate that into our workflow to deliver better, more efficient solutions for our clients. It's sitting next to another transport interchange. Here, we're at London Bridge Station. So 2,500 people will work in this building. There's no cars. Everyone comes by bike or on foot or on the rail next door. Now, it's a very densely built up bit of the city, and the first decision we made was not to build on more than half the site. In fact, we're creating a garden park that welcomes you into Bermondsey as you leave the station. And it's a garden park that the greening then flows into the base of the building, and the base of the building is public. It's a rather Dutch sort of view, moving away from the idea of a kind of august corporate headquarters towards something that's more public, more democratic, and more open. And you see here in that public base of the building that the building is made of a hybrid structure. It's a similar structure that we'll develop at 458 Oxford Street, post-tension concrete with high cement replacement and structural timber. And they're working together, with concrete giving us a slim, low carbon, very robust superstructure, the timber giving us flexibility to connect and reconnect floors. So here we are on the ground floor in the entrance lobby, and in fact, you're walking on recycled materials. This is crushed sanitary ware. So I don't think it's in the marketing, but you're walking on toilet bowls that we're going to recycle and use for the base of the building. There's a lot of recycled content, including the 6-story building we demolished to make this building. We're using a lot of the structure of that back into the landscaping and the new building itself. Edge is important as well because it provided a lot of models for how we might approach the design for 458 Oxford Street, including sensor integration, of which Edge are absolute world pioneers. We're using a similar displacement ventilation system, so the air comes in quietly and cleanly from the floor. We expose the structure to the office space using the fabric of the building to temper the internal environment. We're delivering energy efficiency of 63 kilowatt hours per square meter, inclusive of tenant loads. That is, to the best of our knowledge, the lowest, most efficient building in London. And to pick up the conversation about the integration of post-tension concrete and structural timber, that's delivering a very low embodied energy for the building. It was about 860 kilograms of carbon for A185 at stage 2, which is where we're at on the Oxford Street project. But working closely with Mace, who've just been appointed to build the building for us, we've driven that down by 20%. So we're now at 690. And that's an important point to make, that we will continue to push down embodied carbon. We'll continue, as we've done on this building, to push down operational energy usage. Now, the play zone, as we somewhat lightheartedly describe it, is this timber zone when you first come out of the lift, and I'll show you the same thing at Oxford Street. Here, a tenant has made a connection across these 2 floors, and standing in the same position, this tenant has made other choices. So this is about long life and flexibility and adaptability. This is very key. We don't know how the building will be used in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, but we know if we provide ample dimension and we provide flexibility, it's much more likely that the building will continue to have a beneficial long life. And just while we're on this slide, another prompt for me is to remind us that we have gardens distributed up the height of the building. And well-being is every bit as important as sustainability for the current occupier market. People are drawing their teams back from working at home. We need to bring them back to a healthy, fresh, vibrant workplace. There is, I think, Ian McCarter from Knight Frank in his specialist report described this as a flight to quality. Tenants are increasingly interested in how environmentally sustainable is their workspace and how good is the well-being credentials of it. This building ticks both those boxes. So wind on to earlier in the summer, the office has grown to 70 people, and you'll recognise this because we were here yesterday, the Kensington building on Kensington High Street, a refurbishment of a former department store and one next to a Grade 2 star listed department store. We're feeling resonances, I think, with this morning's conversation. But there are, as I will explain, important differences between this site and Oxford Street, and those differences shaped our response to the two sites. The Pontings department store, 1970s brutalist building, ugly, but it had a lot of potential. It had great floor-to-floor heights, 5 meters, 4.5 meters. It had a very robust, well-understood structure. We had current drawings from the original engineering, and that high retail floor zoning allowed us to extend the building. Now, why is that important? Because it's really key that we optimize the performance of sites next to public transport. Well, we're right next to High Street Kensington Underground, as you saw, and we could, within the constraints of the site, deliver 5 stories rather than the 3 that the existing building provided. And we had the structural capacity in the superstructure to optimize the site. But we could also, from a heritage standpoint, deliver repair. So you'll see this rather brutalist orthogonal facade. We can restore the historic street line on Wrights Lane. So the differences are really profound to the opportunity that confronted us at 458 Oxford Street. There, we didn't have a single building. We didn't have a robust, regular structure. It's very clear that the site's development potential significantly exceeds what one might do in a refurbishment. And we have a single building to work with, and that profoundly affects the quality of the inside space. So what we did on the Kensington building is
Brad, just before you move on, can
course.
you explain custom cars so I'm completely clear about what's
Thank you for your question. So there are a range of refurbishment or retrofit options that can be deployed. A light touch, just to use the terminology, a light touch refurbishment would seek to minimize the embodied carbon. So you would take the found condition of the building and you might judiciously upgrade the fenestration in the facade. You might do double glazing, you might renew elements of the plant, but you would say fundamentally the building's found condition is acceptable. Here, we didn't feel that applied, and we employed a cut and carve, which is to say we demolished cores within the existing building. We created a new core out on the east elevation. So the cut, I guess, is what you take away that isn't working, and the card, I guess, is what you're building back. And specifically, this drawing, I think, shows it nicely. We demolished the roof slab, we took away the cores that were distributed across the floor plate, and then we built back. Built back in a high structure, post-tension concrete, bringing out the facade line on Wrights Lane, a new steel core at the back, and a new steel superstructure. We walked there yesterday on the 5th floor. And the building itself responds to a complex circumstance, to our balancing act, including residential neighbours here on Iverna Court. So we brought the facade line out, but we terraced back to preserve great daylight to those neighbours. And we like those terraces. You saw yesterday, they're beautifully landscaped garden terraces as an adjunct to the office space. And you'll notice that our context also includes 2 department stores. They're listed Grade 2, Barker's, and Grade 2 Star, Derry and Tom's. And they have some resonance, I guess, with the context for our Oxford Street site. Portland stone, giant order with bronze infill. And actually, to some extent, the response we're making at Oxford Street has some resonance with the response we made here at Kensington, because we wanted to acknowledge that relationship. I love the phrase about the great galleons sailing down Oxford Street. Well, in a smaller flotilla, there's some great galleons here on Kensington High Street. And we wanted to acknowledge that, and yet at the same time remain subservient to the Derry and Tom's building. And we chose a white Roman brick. And the nice thing about the brick is, although the coloration makes the strong match you see in this image, it also acknowledged that we had brick neighbours across the Verna Courten. It was, if you will, a more humble material, but one that has great richness and detail and depth. And we celebrate the depth of the construction. We celebrate, for example, that we have opening lights. We're great believers in mixed mode and natural ventilation. You can open the windows to ventilate the offices, and the decoration of those window panels again makes some reference to the Art Deco detailing on Derry and Tom's. So I was explaining differences between Oxford Street and this building, and this plan will do well to illustrate the regular column grid. You can see the original trace of the stepping building. We bring the facade out on that side. So you come onto that floor plate, 4.5 meters clear, things lined through. They've got a generosity, a scale, and order that makes it absolutely appropriate to deliver this quality of a workplace environment. And I thought it was helpful because I know we were looking, Simon and I, on our tour around the M&S building, we're looking at some plastic ivy. We're not doing plastic ivy on 458, we're doing real plants. And our landscape architects, Gillespie's, who are brilliant, did the landscaping on this building. And you could see what that was like in views from the conservation area around the site. Terraces on the lower levels, terraces again as at Oxford Street on the upper levels. What we didn't talk about on the site was what's in my proof evidence is what is all that delivering, and it's delivering very good operational energy. So again, inclusive of tenant allowances, 105 kilowatt hours per square metre per year, and that was less than half the historic building. So more efficient plants, more efficient facades, delivering good operational energy. The embodied carbon on this building is 700 kilograms of carbon per square metre, A1A5. And again, just so I'm clear on my terminology, A1A5 is the construction carbon up to practical completion. Now, there will be more embodied carbon over the life of the building, and there will be operational carbon, B6 and the waters B7, over the life of the building. So when we talk about whole life over 60 years, we're balancing two types of embodied carbon: to build the building and to maintain it, and laying on the top of that the operational carbon. So I'm now talking about the building carbon, the 40,000 tons that I think was referenced by Matthew in the context of this project correctly. And the building carbon on a square metre basis is 700 kilograms. Now you'll notice that that's higher than the predicted figure we have on 458 Oxford Street at the stage of design. That's 653, and Mel Allwood's proof gives you that detail. It's not to say that a refurbishment on the Oxford Street site would have this number, but it is a caution to say that deep cut and carve refurbishments can be associated with high levels of embodied carbon. And certainly we're in a grey area, not white refurbishment, low carbon, black, new build, high carbon. We're talking about differences of carbon intensity. And in this case, the results are great. I make no apology for what we're achieving in the building, but we did invest quite a lot of embodied carbon to get there. Whole life, just because you're going to collect these numbers, I'm sure, over the next 2 weeks, is 1504 kilograms per square metre. So that's all the embodied energy plus all the operational energy over the next 60 years. Let's go on. So we started work on the 458 Oxford Street site in 2018. The context of that work was M&S's declining sales at Marble Arch, and we were tasked to find a route that would secure their long-term success on the site. I guess very unlike the Kensington building, we have, as you saw on the site visit yesterday, 3 buildings, not 1. 3 buildings, none of which were designed for a purpose designed for multi-level retail. 3 buildings that have been extensively adapted to permit them to function as multi-level retail. Well, you saw the consequences walking the site. Chaotic, I think, might be the adjective that I would use. We have very dense structural grids in each of the three buildings, and worse, those grids misalign. To find your way through a store that starts on the ground floor, migrates up across to the first floor on Neil House, and weaves its way between 10 storage positions for M&S is, for a customer, not a good experience. And for a store manager, as you heard yesterday, absolute nightmare. It's the most inefficient and poorly organized store that you could contemplate. You're also seeing the drop off in flows as you come away from Oxford Street. So you've got a series of very small floor plates. They run originally up to level 3, and fewer people make it to the upper floors. And you can see that in the sales data that M&S have published. It's not good enough. And it's got tougher for bricks and mortar retailers, because in the time of the rise of internet shopping, perhaps hastened by the challenges of the pandemic, people won't go to an environment that's as poor as this. It's just no longer competitive. We'll just click online rather than go to a space that's confusing and dispiriting, bluntly. So we've got to up our game. And that's not only a challenge for M&S, although I think the existing building does exacerbate those challenges, because we've seen along Oxford Street the closure of Debenhams. We've seen along Oxford Street the closure of House of Fraser. John Lewis are radically downsizing. So it's part of a much wider challenge for the high street. And I actually remain really bullish about the high street. I think as an architect, they're a critical part of our public realm in cities. They're where we share space. But Oxford Street needs to evolve. And our vision for its evolution is for it to become more genuinely mixed use. So historically, it was a retail thoroughfare. I mean, that's not really true, because historically, I think 20% of the jobs was in retail and 50% was in professional services offices. But it needs to become more and more mixed use. So we bring new uses, office uses on this site, that will contribute to the vibrancy and the vitality of the street, will remain a public thoroughfare at the very heart of Westminster. And, you know, the data's everywhere. I mean, you'll read the specialist reports that Andrew Bond has produced about the really challenging conditions for retail. But just if I take a snapshot, you've read in my evidence, looking at the street in 2017, this was the mix of department stores, high quality retail, some low quality retail, sort of temporary candy stores that we saw, and vacancy. And do the thing, 5 years later, you can see the department stores have shrunk, the high quality retail has shrunk, the candy stores have grown, and the vacancy rates have also grown significantly. So we're looking at Oxford-wide challenges, and M&S are working within that overall environment. The street, when we started work in 2018, and there was a question about these retailers. Were they pushed out by this development? Well, actually, they have a separate landlord, or London Asset Management. And Andrew Turton from M&S confirmed that, in fact, these retailers paid to leave earlier than their lease expiry date. So we're definitely not responsible for this, which is what you saw walking around the site, which is low quality candy store retailers that are compromising the quality of the street. Well, go again. The 3 existing buildings on the site are not in the conservation area, and I don't think that's an accident. I think Westminster are a pretty efficient and professional local authority. They have a statutory obligation to review conservation area boundaries on an ongoing basis, and quite clearly, those 3 buildings have been excluded from conservation areas that surround the site. We were talking about analogies of Kensington. Again, same situation. Kensington, we're not in conservation area, but we were surrounded by conservation areas. 3 buildings. I guess the 2 that flank Orchard House are, for me, negative in respect to the surrounding conservation areas. This building, non-designated heritage asset, sits at the lowest level of heritage significance from a statutory standpoint, as was discussed yesterday. It's not of listable quality. Now, there will be others more expert than I that will talk about the relationship of Selfridges, the fantastic Daniel Burnham Beaux-Arts masterpiece on the other side of Orchard Street, and this building. But what I see is, if there's a relationship, it's one that's very derivative. I mean, this is a commercial office building. It's not designed for retail, and you can sort of see commerciality creeping in. So you notice that the giant order Ionic columns on Burnham get kind of reprised as pilasters here on Orchard House. But we squeeze in an extra floor. So rather than 3, you get 4. They're squished in a little bit. And rather than those great 2-meter deep columns, it's all thin paper. It's pushed to the sort of thinnest degree. So it has a kind of meanness about it in comparison with the Burnham buildings. And Pevsner agrees. The pilastered Marks and Spencers, he's not quite right about that, because actually it was designed for John Lyons. The pilastered Marks and Spencers 1929 to 32 by Traherne and Norman with W.A. Lewis shows clearly what a convinced single-minded design Selfridges was. So it's damned, if you will, with faint praise. And it's a building that's been very substantially altered. It's right, buildings do get altered, but this one's really been scraped. So the decorative carvings of Mr. Lewis removed, with the exception of the Knight's Head that we're going to relocate. The balconies on the first floor stripped away. So we're looking at less than an original design. I think that original design not exceptional. We're also looking at a change to its urban context, which is really important to the work that we'll look at on the site. So originally it was a building that terminated an urban block, and Granville Place ran through to Orchard Street, and Orchard Street then provided on connection through Somerset Street to St Christopher's Place. Well, Selfridges has expanded across that, but as we walked yesterday, you see the route is still clear within the store. In 1968 to 1970, the 23 Orchard Street extension was constructed, blocking that route, and is it Roy Lichtenstein's Kapow? I think architecturally this is brutal, abrupt, and poor. It just crashes into the back of Orchard House. And it gets worse, because at the time of the extension, the road was widened, 4 lanes rather than 3, and that drove an undercroft under the bottom of the building. So it's been kind of crashed into on the edge, it's been stripped on the upper levels, and we've now got an undercroft along Orchard Street. And this undercroft, what we walked to yesterday, I won't describe it, though dark, it's an oppressive environment for pedestrians. And I think it's worse, the fact that you don't even have the shop fronts on this side. We don't have them because there's a core sitting there. So you're between a blind solid wall and a row of columns hard out onto the footway. It's not good enough, and it's not good enough in policy as well. So if you look at the Oxford Street District Place and Delivery Strategy, Westminster's document says Orchard Street, not good enough, needs to be improved. Granville Place, not good enough, it needs to be improved. And the 1973 building bridges over Portman Mews South. It's calamitous in terms of the quality of the public realm, a dark, low tunnel. It's calamitous in terms of its impact on Hesketh House, the Hanston building that takes us to Portman Square. And we walked this yesterday, it gets worse around the back. On Granville Place, Russell said, does it smell bad? It smells of diesel. I mean, it's really a really poor environment for pedestrians. Well, there aren't pedestrians there, and it's probably good that there aren't pedestrians there, because to access these loading bays that dominate these frontages, we've got vehicles reversing across the highway into the loading bays. You would never be allowed to do that today. It's completely unsafe and unsustainable. I liked the committee description. It's probably Matthew writing that Neil House is described as rather fierce, a rather fierce red building. I mean, this is one where you might use the word crap without being contradicted. It's a very poor quality piece of architecture. And although we only glimpse the edge of Orchard House here, you can see that the 3 buildings are a kind of architectural zoo. They have no interrelationship, either materially or proportionally or in terms of style and design. We've got an animal collection of different, and I think quite poor buildings. So when we started work in 2018, it's really critical to say this. We're designing a building for M&S. It's a bespoke building for M&S. It's tailored to a brief that we worked with them to refine and optimize, and it provides the route for their long-term successful presence on Oxford Street. So we are in a position where public statements be made that they will occupy this building, and the building would not have been designed in the way that I've designed it if we hadn't had that client input. And what's encouraging, I think, for M&S Group is that where they've got new stores, this is Clapham, they've opened one at Stevenage, they've seen really successful trade. So it's not that bricks and mortar has had its day. With the right quality, with the right calibre of space, they believe they can succeed. And that's important for our high streets, it's important for our economy and for our public realm. So we were looking at the quality of spaces yesterday. You saw the present environment, and we walked through to David Chipperfield's restoration of the eastern end of Selfridges. And I thought that was really helpful because this is what we want to deliver. So picture that, picture this, we want to deliver this. 5.5 metre high clear ceilings, wide, open and regular column grids, daylight flooding the interior. And we think that's not optional, that's critical, because if we can deliver this calibre of space, we will get retail trading success. But equally, we don't know what the future will hold in the long term. And a lot of the conversations we had with M&S's brilliant retail team was to say, well, what things are coming along down the line that we can see now? I guess those are Donald Rumsfeld's known unknowns, things like, for example, Tilda's trading. That's coming, and we're thinking about in the store. But actually, the biggest legacy for long-term flexibility is generosity in scale, so that we have an open, adaptable floor plate. And I liken this to retailers' theatre. In a way, we're building the infrastructure, but the scenery will change, will evolve, will adapt to stay relevant, to stay attractive, to stay successful. And that's possible because we're creating the right framework for that transformation to occur. It was also really clear from the data of the fewer people that go further up the building that we've got to be a ground level proposition, all space within one floor of the Oxford Street entrance. That's absolutely fundamental. So you come in, go down the floor to food at the lower ground floor, go up the floor to menswear on the first floor. We therefore need large floor plates. We therefore need the lower ground floor to be retail trading. Now that's absolutely fundamental to what we'll talk about, because actually what you need in these buildings is a lot of support infrastructure. So we don't have any cars, but we do have fantastic cycle facilities, lockers, showers, all the ancillary for that stuff. Where does that stuff go? We have plant that's going to deliver really low operational energy. Where does that stuff go? Well, in a refurbishment, you're locked into the existing lower ground floor. You can't dig a deeper basement under the existing building. So we know the answer to that. It goes on the lower ground floor. But the corollary of that, of course, is that you don't have retail down there. And that means that the M&S stuff has to go up, not one floor from ground, but 2 or even 3. So fundamental to delivering this vision, we need to create some basement space to deal with those support functions. And this is the detail of the area brief. We also were given dimensional targets and so forth. But when M&S started work, and we were working from the summer of 2018, they explicitly tasked us to take a comprehensive set of options. We would have done this as architects in any case, and consider all potential routes to delivering their brief. And I summarised in the DAS here 16 of those options. There were many more. And they dealt with a number of issues that we now think of as settled, but were live for us to determine. So, for example, did we include Neil House, or did we seek to deliver their brief just on the Orchard House and Orchard Street extension? Did we deliver one building on the site or 2? And what if the site's capacity was significantly more than the retail demand? What was that balancing use best conceived as being? Was it office? Was it hotel? Was it residential. We looked through all of those options and we were helped in that journey by close and ongoing dialogue with Westminster to assess the relative merits of those schemes. We included a wide range of refurbishment schemes, light touch, cut and carve, facade retention. I mean, just to take one example, this was a study looking at excluding Neil House. We were thinking, could we use Neil House maybe as a decant space while we delivered accommodation on the Orchard House and Orchard Street extension, and looking to how we might configure large floor plate retail for M&S on the lower floors. You'll notice here, because it's a refurb, we don't get any basement space. So here, the yellow is the M&S running on those upper levels. And then to access the offices across the top, did you create a core on that edge? But I've got to say that none of these schemes came close to meeting the requirements either of M&S themselves as a retail operator, nor optimizing the site dimension. And some of the challenges that we were grappling with back in those initial studies was looking at a building. I've talked about 3 buildings and the challenges of 3 different structural systems, different grids and their misalignment. But actually, to make them function as multi-level retail, huge amounts of adaptation took place since the building's construction. So we have no less than 9 cores scattered across the plan, but a lot of the cores as a building's perimeter. And no less than 18 lifts. And you can see that the lifts are a little bit vague about some serve some floors, some don't serve other floors, some are passengers, some are goods. They're scattered across the plan. And those cores and the lifts within them block the views on the ground floor. That's bad for the public realm. It's bad for an M&S brief that now wants daylight. And of course, on the upper levels, those cores are very problematic for daylight to the office use. I mean, I guess all of this is saying that light touch is certainly very problematic because the basic form of the building isn't going to be good for that future office function. And we've got, you saw it looking around the site, the majority of the windows are blocked. It's not that they've just been filled over, they're blocked with actual cores that have been inserted in behind those facades. So we really need to remove the core to get light back into the interior. And we've got sections of the fenestration. Let's look at 23 Orchard Street, where the quantum of glazing is wholly inadequate to, for example, an office use on the space behind it. So that there are built-in problems with the fenestration from sections of the site. And then we come to the columns. I think I actually pointed those 4 out to you when we were in the store. So you have quite a tight column grid generally, but you also have zones of very, very intense columns with gaps of sort of 1.5 meters. So effectively, it renders the space around those very densely column spaces unusable. You can't do display in there. They just effectively end up being kind of neutralized space. And the tough one about the columns here on the ground floor, here on the typical floor, tough thing about the columns is like the building. It's the thing that holds the building up. So yeah, we can talk about removing cores, but we can't realistically talk about removing the columns. They're kind of basically what it is that's invested in Griff's terms in the embodied energy of the existing building. And as you saw in those long views around the store at the moment, because the grids misalign and crank, you don't get those nice clean sight lines we saw in Selfridges. You get basically lines of columns that block your view. So it feels claustrophobic. It feels very poor quality space. Now, those are potentially subjective comments, but I thought it was helpful. You saw in the evidence that M&S appended to Chris Goddard's group. What are they doing on other comparable modern M&S sites? And this is looking at the bay size for the projects that are cited in that evidence. I've drafted, but the numbers are based on the numbers in evidence. And you'll see that the existing building, by a large margin, is way denser than the kind of column grids that are typical for contemporary M&S occupation. This is a mixture of new build and refurbishments. I also want to say that you'll notice ours is not the biggest column grid, right? So some of these go to 12 by 12, and we're 9 by 9 or 9 by 10.5. And that's not accidental, because And this is a dialogue we had with M&S. We said, if you go super big on the column grid, you go very high carbon. You kind of move towards steel, which is very high carbon. So we sort of compromised to go with a sensible grid, more open than the existing building, or regular than the existing building, but not, I would use the word greedy, not greedy. We're looking at compromise. In fact, actually enough, it's very like the Selfridges grid on the eastern side of the store that we looked at yesterday. And it's noted in evidence from SAFE, quite correctly, that a number of other department stores further east have been refurbished. Debenhams, House of Fraser. But I think when you look at the plans, you can immediately see that there's a huge difference between these buildings, which are broadly of a single date and certainly arranged with a regular orthogonal column grid, and the car crash of the three different grids that we see within the building. And I wanted to kind of take you to what's being delivered on these sites. And just as a sort of parentheses, these buildings are ground plus 9 stories. We're ground plus 9 stories. These buildings are centre core, and they deliver clear open space around the perimeter. We're centre core, and we deliver clear open space around the perimeter. So it's interesting that the goals of these schemes, delivered in their different ways through refurbishment or new build, the product we're trying to deliver, the flight to quality that Ian McArthur references, is being delivered in each of these schemes, and couldn't, I would argue, be delivered in the context of a refurbishment in this manner. It's also worth noting, just by the by, that this building, the Debenhams building, and this building, the House of Fraser, have more generous floor to ceiling heights. It's not a huge difference, about 300 mil on Debenhams, but that extra height does give you more flexibility to work with. So single buildings that have been successfully refurbished, I think that's resonant with Kensington. 3 buildings that I don't think could be. So let's talk a little about the height. These are the existing building heights, the floor-to-floor heights, and the clear heights. And you can see the existing, as we walked around the store with Sasha yesterday, there are many points that are lower than this, but typically on the ground floor, 3.8 meters. We wanted to live 5.4, akin to Selfridges, and on the upper floors, 2.9 or 2.5 meter clear height. So the scale of the building is very tight in dimensional terms, tighter than Debenhams, tighter than House of Fraser. And if we look at that from a comparison with the other example projects M&S provided you with their recent stores, you can see that by a margin, the heights in the existing are lower than those other buildings. Now here I'm right out on the most generous side, and perhaps we might debate that, but it does seem to us, and it seemed to M&S in setting the brief, that we're right at the heart of the international centre. We're on the nation's high street. We're a flagship looking for a long-term future. We think we should be no worse than our neighbour Selfridges. We want to deliver the highest quality of space. But be that as it may, very clearly the existing doesn't meet the standards that have been delivered on other buildings. So we talked about cores, we talked about ceiling heights, we talked about column grids. There's another problem, and Simon and I have been on correspondence on this, but go to level 2, and you saw it yesterday, the floors don't align. They don't align at level 2, they don't align at level 3, they don't align at level 4. They do align at level 1, so no question that there the floor is level. They don't align at the ground floor. Actually, you don't notice that because the two separate, the candy stores, shops are set at a different level. And it's worth mentioning, by the way, while we're on the ground floor, did you notice the entrance is inaccessible for wheelchair users? You have to go up to get in the front door of your store. Not good enough for M&S, not good enough for us. Shouldn't be good enough for anyone in looking at that. So we get these level changes, and what does that mean in practice? It means we have ramps, we have very complicated circulation. It's not as accessible as a level flat floor would be. And I touched on the basement. I go through it again. Basically, one floor is going to be needed for plant and support space if we convert the others to offices. And we don't want that floor to be at the lower ground. We want to put that down outside in the basement. And look, that's a discussion. I hope Matthew will ask you questions on this, because basements are high carbon. I mean, the Edge building, we've got 3 levels of basement, and again, Simon and I chatting on our letters over over the course of the summer debated the Google building at King's Cross. 4 levels of basement. Simon was involved in that, and he said he regretted the depth of the basement. But it did have some good things, because what you can build the basement, and you can put the plant, and you can put the cycles, and you can put the support spaces down there. What you get at ground floor is active frontage. So you don't need to sterilize really valuable, really important, really prominent space for the stuff that you want to put out of sight. And I think the last consideration when we look at the limitations of refurbishment is about site optimization. And Russell, in his opening remarks yesterday, reminded us that D3, the spatial strategy for London, grounded in sustainability, agrees with me that highly compact, efficient, dense cities are the key to zero carbon development in the future, where we're not relying on private cars, we're not sprawling into the green belt, we're going to deliver really efficient buildings right on top of fantastic public infrastructure like the Elizabeth line. Now, in August 2020, Matthew Pendleton and colleagues at Westminster, guiding our work on the site, suggested a development envelope, a ground plus 9-story building. This is the model that they very kindly provided for us. And very simply, you can say, well, does that then describe the site's capacity? And in suggesting ground plus 9, I apologize for the quality of this slide, we're in good company. Park House, ground plus 9. Debenhams, former Debenhams, ground plus 9. House of Fraser, ground plus 9. So I love that description of the great galleons. I think it was in Alex's proof, the great galleons sailing down Oxford Street. I agree, but the galleon scale has evolved, has changed, and we are simply part of that evolution, similar in scale to those neighbouring buildings and comfortable neighbours with our Oxford Street context. So just running a slide rule over that, we can deliver, as you've seen, about 61,000 square metres of development on this site. If you do the same calculation for refurbishment, and this is based on Arup's numbers, calculating the maximum structural capacity. So this is extending these buildings to their absolute limit. You get to about 45, perhaps 47,000. So around 74, 76% of the development potential of the site. Put another way, you're missing a quarter of the development potential. So it very significantly under-delivers on a site that is really, really well placed in relation to the transport infrastructure, and really, really unusual in, and Russell reminded us of this yesterday, in that it's in the 22% of Westminster that's not conservation area. So in other words, the opportunity to optimize development, sitting on top of the Elizabeth line, is not one that comes often or frequently. This is the sort of site where that uniquely can happen. And in my experience, the quantum of additional development over the existing, so at the moment we've got about 35,000 square meters, we might add 10 to 12,000 square meters. That is not commercially viable. Let's take Kensington. We increased the floor space by 50%, and the scheme was commercially viable because of that uptake. I don't believe, in my experience, that this modest increase would yield a commercially viable scheme. And that's something that ICANN, for example, in Makata, has assessed in a similar fashion in the appendix to Chris Goddard's rebuttal proof of evidence. So I'll illustrate the refurbishment alternatives, and I'll have to look, for example, at the scheme that Simon shared with us a couple of weeks ago. But it's important to say that viability is absolutely fundamental, and I don't think those refurbishment schemes are commercially viable. They have architectural shortcomings, but I don't think they're commercially viable. So we concluded that a new building both was the route to deliver M&S's operational brief. It was also the route to optimize the site's development potential, as we must do by policy. That wasn't a journey we took alone, so we were in frequent and close discussions with Westminster, frequent and close discussions with the GLA. We had 50 meetings over 18 months with numerous stakeholders, both statutory and non-statutory. We had public exhibitions, we've met with neighbours. And so what I'm sharing with you is not our work alone, it's really the product of that collaborative engagement and dialogue. And the building seeks to be exemplary in its retail and contribution to Oxford Street. It seeks to be exemplary in the absolute top tier of new workspace, and it seeks to effect a transformation of the public realm, and that's where I might suggest starting work. So we looked very carefully at the relationship of that massing parameter to Selfridges. Daniel Burnham's wonderful Grade 2 star listed department store, tough. Those are masterpiece. And frankly, we were a bit concerned. So we're actually suggesting the building was smaller than Westminster's parameter. Let's go again. So this is standing in the Stratford Place local conservation area view. I think something that Alec asked us to look at in his rebuttal. And you get here the full force of the Burnham masterpiece. A great plinth containing the ground floor retail, the giant order ionic screen, and then supporting this tough, robust entablature with a strong cornice above that overall composition. It's a piece of bravura architecture. It's pretty unique within London. And Carolina just clicked to show you the impact of our proposals. I might have to reverse to that again. Click that back if you would. And forward. So from this view, and I repeat, this is the view that we were asked particularly to look at, you can see that we entirely preserve the silhouette of the cornice of the building, and we continue the cornice line further along the street. That feels no more than good manners. Let's look at that in a computer view if we can. So again, Westminster parameter, our proposal, no visibility above the cornice line. And if I'm walking from Marble Arch coming east along Oxford Street, you see a continuation of the cornice line of Selfridges through the cornice line of our proposed building. The red line, I'm sorry for the quality of the screen, the red line is the Westminster parameter.
You just point that out.
Yeah. And you see, I apologise for the screen, there's a little line there. That is that line. And I think it's probably higher quality if we can share these as a printed slide. Go again. And I'll talk in a little more detail, if I may, about the relationship to Selfridges. Again, there are some similarities in the challenge of the Kensington building and some similarities in our response. So we're looking at a white Roman brick. We're looking fundamentally at a building that observes the precepts of classical planning. So a clearly defined base, importantly a single-story base. Again, that was something that we tested with Westminster 1 or 2 floors. We got a single-story base to reflect Selfridges. And then the great entablature above the giant order ionic columns reflected in the oversailing timber cornice and recess on that edge. So we're seeing the hierarchy of base, body, and attic. And I'll look at that, if I may, in a little more detail. But actually, I think our first work, in considering the opportunities that might flow from a new building, were around the public realm. And it felt to us to go back to the historic permeability across the site. And although we haven't got Somerset Street, we walked yesterday through a Selfridges that is very clear in preserving that line of east-west connectivity. And we wanted to extend that across Orchard Street and make a wonderful arcade to link you through to a garden. Now, in a funny way, the sort of front of house and visitor experience was the easy bit. The tough one was, how did you deal with all that servicing? But what we were able to do, working with Montadis, our brilliant transport engineers, was deliver a compact, efficient and safe service bay on Portland Mews South. A bay you enter and exit in the forward direction. We're not going to run over any pedestrians. A bay that delivers really efficient servicing for M&S and really efficient servicing for the offices on the upper levels. And all of that discreetly placed on Portland Mews, where it faces another loading bay serving the Portland Square buildings. And I think always our thinking here was joined up. So we can move the servicing to the Portland Mews, we can recreate a garden space on Granville Place. Maybe click again, Carolina, if you will. And that garden space, linked by a wonderful arcade to Orchard Street, will then do the journey that we took yesterday through the store to the David Chippenfield piece and on to Sir Christopher's Place. And that importance of creating wonderful oasis spaces off Oxford Street, well, it's all in the Oxford Street District Place and Delivery Strategy. Westminster notified that it's really key for the offer that you have a place where you can stop, you can rest after lunch, you're shopping, a quiet oasis garden space. And our oasis here will have a cafe, we'll have the an entrance to the office and a frontage to the M&S, activating that part of the site. So in blunt terms, what we have today and standing in the same place, what we will deliver through these 458 Oxford Street proposals. You see the arcade, and rather nicely that gives you a glimpse at Mr. Burnham's wonderful plinth on the Selfridges building. Ahead of you, we have an entrance, a secondary entrance into the office, and the core that serves the upper levels of the building. On our right, the M&S, and on our left, a cafe, and the cafe linked to a gym. There's some of the other ways. So we've left Selfridges now, and we're walking across Orchard Street to a wide pavement, and then we're in a space with on the left, the new M&S flagship, on the right, the office entrance, and you come to this, a top-lit atrium with wonderful landscaping cascading down it, and you're drawn through to a garden space, an oasis, to use the terminology of Westminster, with, again, direct access into the M&S on the left. And I'll turn here to see the cafe and connections to the gym on the left of that space, and on to the office secondary entrance from Granville Place. So we're about making a suite of active frontages around this space itself. I showed you that wider pavement, and it's part of a strategy to draw the building back from the site boundaries generally, and more particularly from the points where we get the most intense pedestrian flow. So coming through themselves, you can see we're creating a little public square. With the second square on Oxford Street, so again, drawing the building back, so we're creating really generous public realm. And then this route runs through the M&S. It's kind of an arcade, recalling the M&S's origins, the Penny Bazaar, that connects you back to this garden. So a sequence of links across the site. But that inflection of the facade then frames a vertical cleft. So from a wayfinding standpoint, it's really clear where you can make those links across the site to the new public realm delivered by the building. And I guess those clefts, in a contemporary way, make reference to Mr. Burnham's wonderful central cleft in the heart of that 21 Bay Oxford Street frontage. Well, cleft's a contemporary reinterpretation of that, and you're looking up to timber ceilings, and at the ground floor, this new arcade. This is Orchard Street. We have a similar detail on Oxford Street. So Oxford Street today and Oxford Street as we envisage it standing in the same position. So this is the Oxford Street cleft. You come into a little double height space. You're connecting up to the M&S trading on the first floor, and out beyond, you've got views to the Granville Place garden. Now, it's often said, and I think it's said by a number of people who've commented on the scheme, well, the M&S building on the corner. But of course, M&S isn't just the corner building. The M&S is the whole of the Oxford Street frontage, and this building celebrates that presence with wonderful open glazed frontages into the ground floor of their three-level trading presence, and a very clear an invitation to enter and to explore. And you'll recognize in the scale of the space we're delivering here, the 5.4 meter ceilings, the 10.5 by 9 meter grid, many of the same elements that you saw in the Chipperfield Selfridges. We want to be no less good. Indeed, we believe it to be critical to be as good to succeed in future bricks and mortar retail. The offices are equally important to Oxford Street's vitality and future success, and they need to have the right arrangements for reception and entrance. And we create on the northern part of Orchard Street, and activating that arcade we just walked down, a really grand main lobby with a subsidiary lobby, and they have all of the support spaces that you need for a fully functioning modern office. And we finally include an entrance to the food hall facing up towards Wigmore Street and towards Portland Square that adds extra activation on the northeast corner. That connects down into the lower ground floor. So we'll talk a lot about the quality of the buildings and their contribution to the setting of Selfridges. And I wanted to have this conversation standing with you here on Orchard Street, looking south to Oxford Street, and to ask, is this really the setting of a Grade 2 star listed building? I would prefer this, where we draw the building back, we create a wide footway, open to the air, and you can really celebrate and enjoy the full expanse of Burnham's masterpiece. Let's do that in the other direction. So today, rather hazardously, our photographer is out on that narrow strip of pavement, and what we would like to produce is a wide footway crossing to Selfridges on this edge, introducing street trees importantly. We haven't talked about urban greening, but we introduced new trees on Oxford Street, new trees on Orchard Street, new trees on Portland New South, new trees on Granville Place. And those trees are possible only because we can draw the building back to give you dimension to create that green space on that edge. We want to sweep away this bridge. This is an ugly disfigurement of the Portman Estate Conservation Area, an ugly disfigurement of Hesketh House. Our building not only removes the bridge, but repairs the flank on Hesketh House and returns, I think, more importantly, Portman Mews to a decent public street. There's no reason why it needs to be a service tunnel. It creates something of an appropriate calibre. And you can see the Portman Estate have been supportive of these proposals precisely for that transformational change. Let's look the other way. The bridge, unacceptable. We'll get rid of it. And then this is the service access. And it's important to say, we face, you can see, other service access. We need to be careful and considerate with this. These buildings will need service. M&S will need service. The office will need service. We've got to be sure that we're doing that efficiently and safely. All the vehicles can enter and exit on this frontage. Just to put some numbers to that, 770 square metres of new public realm, high quality public realm, delivered by the new building in comparison with the existing. It's about, I think, 8,500 square feet. In active frontage today, 84 linear metres of active frontage. The great majority of the site is blind, inactive, hostile, unsafe at night. We'll triple the amount of active frontage. 240 linear metres of active frontage delivered on the proposals with consequent benefits to the public realm.
Mr. Bilbright, how are you doing?
We're doing good. I'm moving quick. We're nearly there.
Okay, splendid.
We talked about the floor-to-floor heights. I think just to say how different they are when we drive into detail. The 6 floors of the existing equate to 5 floors in the proposed. So we're sharing essentially a full story of accommodation back into the other parts of the building. What that yields is a sensational M&S flagship ground, first floor, lower ground. Lower ground you see running all the way through the depth of the plan with sort of quietly humming away and supporting all that support space in the basement that's critical to that function. And that delivers an extraordinary customer journey front of house, but it also underpins a very efficient servicing and logistics plan, developing these with M&S to make sure that they continue to operate best quality service in the most efficient manner. So we've looked at the retail on the ground floor. We've then 4 floors of office accommodation above. I'm walking up Oxford Street, and above the cornice, there's 3 further floors of office accommodation set back behind some landscape terraces. You saw a similar detail on the Kensington building. So the offices are very carefully woven into the public realm strategy. So we have the garden, the connectivity from Oxford Street to Granville Place. We have the active frontages that I've just been outlining, including the office lobby on that side. We were helped by to plan for the offices is to deliver really beautiful and high quality workspace, a centre core, taking benefit of the great perimeter light that we can deliver in the new building, and it supports flexible tenancy so that we accommodate large scale and small scale organisations. We have mail rail running onto the site. That meant you couldn't build a heavy core in the middle of the site. So the middle of the core is lightweight. It's a glazed set of lifts. It's an atrium, and it means that when you're walking to and from the vertical circulation, you're walking to and from light. I think it's something you saw in the Kensington building as an interest, and we have light at the heart of the plan. That atrium is a landscaped vertical cleft, and it comes all the way down to and contacts the arcade at the base. You see the section here, the green wall to the atrium coming down to that east-west link. Like the Edge building, we have structural timber integrated into a low embodied carbon superstructure, 653 kilograms of carbon per square metre, and that timber is zoned in areas where we want the most flexibility to connect floors into the future. So there's zones east and west of the core, and there's a zone above the cleft on Oxford Street. And that timber will be evident as you walk down Orchard Street and you look up to the building on that side. Clothing the base of the building, we have a well-scaled street wall. Ground plus 4, where it touches Selfridges here on the southeast. Ground plus 5, where it touches Hesketh House, or it's adjacent to Hesketh House. And those relationships are studied very carefully with Matthew and colleagues at Westminster. So here you can see the ground plus 4, the recess to the cornice, reflecting the scale of the entablature on the Burnham Selfridges. And here you can see ground plus 5, abutting the cornice, and again reflecting the scale of Hesketh House. So we're making careful street wall relationships between the new and the old. And that cornice itself is a strong horizontal datum. It's sometimes described as oversailed. I just want to say it's actually built entirely within the site curtilage, unlike Selfridges, which sticks out over the pavement. The fact you see it is because we've drawn the body of the building back in. And that cornice is timber. The timber reflects the presence of structural timber within the body of the building. And I guess if we were to be a little more poetic, we might go into a discourse about classical architecture's origin. You'll know, sir, that this makes stone what was originally constructed in timber. So, for example, the dental molds are the ends of timber choice. I learned the phrase petrification. Here's the Abbey Nogia. I love this story. So the original timber is returned to in a highly crafted and sculptural timber element that finishes the top of the building facade. Petrification is the term in question. Timber's up there. Then we have the main body of the building, white Roman brickwork, and Portland stone string courses at each of the stories. And we're looking at whether we can actually reuse the Portland stone on the existing building to provide that material for us. You'll notice the relationships to Selfridges are ones of material, but importantly, for scale, we're actually much finer grain, and that's not accidental. We don't want to compete with the giant order of Selfridges, so we're looking at a finer grained gridded facade, but it's not a blunt grid. It has elements of articulation. One that I'm particularly interested in and want to describe is the environmental approach to the wall, because we want to deliver very high internal quality with low energy. And we developed a series of bespoke solar shades that protect the interior. And they nicely are a kind of third presence between the glass and the masonry that gives the layering. You'll see that they're different on each of the floors. Could you liken it to the entasis of a classical column? There's a slight gradation. So we're not a dead, repetitive frame, but something that has richness. I think I have a few details on that. So just to say, the piers themselves articulate as they go up. You saw that in Kensington. And this is the work we were doing with our colleagues at Arup to optimize the performance. We targeted the regulated loads of 55 kilowatt hours. In fact, we're significantly under that with 33 kilowatt hours per square meter regulated loads. And the efficiency of the shading, the lean part of this equation, is the biggest single step we've taken to deliver that. Without the shading, the exposed glazing in the clefts and on the recessed fifth floor would overheat. The cornice protects the clefts and the recessed glazing. But the glazing on the facade is a really innovative thing that's not been done before. We track for each window the peak moment, the peak hour in the year when you get the greatest solar load for each window. And that's obviously dependent on orientation, on height, on the adjacent buildings. And then once you know where the peak load is, you can design a very simple and efficient solar shade to block that sun. And when we run the analysis with Arup on the overall fault on the year, we discover it's a very, very effective means of using direct solar gain. And it's a direct response, but it's also a response that layers richness and beauty. So this is contemporary elevation. It has, in its own unashamedly modern way, some of the richness of the fantastic Solomaic columns in the Burnham elevation. I'm conscious I'm running over time, so I'll go super fast. At the end, at the top of the building, we set back, again, compliant with Westminster's parameters, compliant with the good principles of base, body, and attic, the attic setting back. And actually, for the office, that's really, really good, because we're giving variety of office products. Some users will want deeper border walls, some will want shallower. All of them will have very high quality space within the building. And critically, we took the decision to treat those upper levels as a sequence of gardens, landscape gardens. Well, the GLA set an urban breeding factor for new developments, and we comfortably exceeded, in part because of the street trees I discussed earlier, but mostly because we created this large garden on the upper levels of the building. This summarises the variety of office space across the scheme. And this gives you a flavour of how the gardens, which are a series of pocket terraces on the Oxford Street frontage, are woven into the daily life of the office buildings, with British soleil upon which we're going to grow these fantastic climbing plants. With a shared club room on the top, and that club room benefits from a generous terrace and fantastic views. And this matters because we've got to deliver the highest quality of office space to deliver the demand, to meet the demand for this calibre of workspace in the city. An aerial view, and I'll show you the model if I may in a moment, would emphasise that this looks like quite a grand gesture, sort of pyramidal cascading gardens. And so it is, but actually when you experience it at the street level, it's pretty modest, and very modest in the context of Oxford Street. Just see it there. Very modest in the context of Orchard Street, walking down from Portman Mews, you just see it there. And pretty modest as we go down North Orchard Street. You see it more as we come further away. And again, I'm completely positive about its impact in terms of its presence. We're in a very green part of Mayfair here, and that green will resonate as it does at Kensington on the upper levels of the plan. And to emphasise, real plants, not plastic ivy. I think we're nearly there. Fine, and then we take the landscape down into the building. I've touched on some of the kind of passive design measures that we've adopted, working closely with Arabs who are achieving BREEAM Outstanding, WELL Platinum, WIRE Platinum. We're in the top 6% of offices in terms of consents granted in 2021. I think we're probably going to be even better than that, but it's no question this is really the sort of most sustainable model for development across the site. So finally, I just thought it was we had sort of at the last moment some thoughts from Simon about what a deep cut and carve refurbishment might be like, and I thought that was really helpful because in a way that gives you Save's vision for what might be delivered on site. I think it was worth us spending 5 minutes perhaps talking about that. What Simon's done is borrowing sensibly on the work that Eric's done, is saying, well, we've definitely looked to maximise the development potential. We can add 3 floors to Neil House and 2 to Orchard House. I think he's correctly saying you could probably add a floor at the back of 10 Portman Mews, which isn't on this drawing, and do all of that stuff, and we'll get to about 45 to 47,000 square metres. So it's very significantly below the quantum that would be delivered by the new building. I said theoretical because again, there's a huge question mark about the viability of delivering what I will show you, very compromised quality space, and not giving much additional area to fund it. So this was Simon's sketch sent at the end of his rebuttal proof a couple of weeks ago, and in a way we could be quite sort of complimented. And I think actually Matthew said rather nicely the relevance of our scheme that saved light, and in a way you could see elements of our proposals reflected in Simon's sketch, a centre core. The presumption, I'll come back to it, you would take one of the cores away, and then on the ground floor, acknowledging that it would be a good idea to move the loading bay to Portman Mews South. It would be a good idea to deliver a garden space at the end of Granville Place. It would be a good idea to deliver some permeability. I think Simon suggested here to Oxford Street. We'll come back and look at that in a little bit more detail. A good idea to get rid of the, what was the phrase, unpleasant undercroft on Orchard Street. So you can see there are sort of, there's a great deal of common ground in terms of what we would seek to deliver, but can we deliver it? Well, the first point I would make is that this is a very, very substantial cut and carve. We're going back to our lexicon. There's a lot of cutting. So removing the 8 perimeter cores is about 16% of the floor space, and then to create a new centre core building, a further 11%. So about 27% of the floor plate, Simon is suggesting, needs to change to get an acceptable result on this site. And we need to pause there, and we need to ponder, because you saw Kensington and you saw the embodied carbon. 11% of the floor plate was changing. 11%, 27%. So this is a very substantial intervention. Now, to be fair, Simon says we work with existing elevations, so we wouldn't have the embodied carbon of the new elevations that we were producing at Kensington. But the level of structural intervention is huge. I think there's also a problem, to be blunt, with drawing the loading bay that we drew in the new building and saying, hey, I can do that in a refurbishment. And the difficulty we have is the loading bay needs to be 4.5 meters clear, and the existing ground floor is 5.133 meters. Okay, so I've got a little over 5 meters, and I need 4.5 of that to be clear for my trucks. And yet, in that zone, in the existing building, I've got 9 columns and 3 cores, and they all need to go somewhere. So, hey, we'll transfer them out, yeah. But you can't do that. This is to scale in 2 foot. There's just not enough depth for it. So that I think doesn't work, and it's going to get tougher because I'm, with Simon, do we add some extra floors? Yeah, we can do that. But of course, we're adding extra load onto those very columns that we then need to transfer. And even if you said, hey, I'll knock down the back of the building and just rebuild this section, you're still locked into those existing floors. 5 meters in the existing, 6 meters in the proposed. We have the 6 meters for a good reason. It gives space to do load base. So in summary, no, I don't think you can do that. Nor do I think you can get rid of the, Simon's word, unpleasant undercroft on Orchard Street. Now, why do I say that? Because the new highways arrangements funded by the development, so important parentheses here, it's possible because our development is viable and is making Section 106. But let's say you took the assumption that refurb is viable, I don't think it is, then say you could deliver those highways arrangements. Surely you have enough room for the pavement outside Orchard House. Not so. We set that building back by 1.1 meters to give you that right dimension. So you need 3.3. That's a figure we get from TfL's highways design standards. And in the existing building, the pinch point is 2.2. Now, there was a discussion with Alec on our site visit about the relationship to Hesketh House, and Carolina very kindly looked at it for me. So at Hesketh House, the curb line existing 3.5 meters. But unfortunately, Orchard House pushes east from Hesketh House by 877 millimeters, and the curb line in the new arrangements comes in the other way by 461 millimeters. So I'm afraid with the existing building and the proposed highways works, you end up with a 2.2 meter pavement. It's just not enough. The conclusion, you have to keep the unpleasant undercroft. So we've got a loading bay, which I think technically doesn't work, and we've got an undercroft, which has to stay, both undesirable. But what about the third element in Simon's sketch, so a retail arcade? Now, I'm bound to say that I think it's in the wrong place, and I think the powerful diagram to link St Christopher's Place to Orchard Street in the historic line, I think that's to be preferred. But let's say you ran with that. Here we have, I go to the next, this is the context. So we're keeping this, that is the arcade. It runs all the way through the depth of Neil House. So unlike our arcade, which is top lit, it's really a tunnel. And the clear height, if you allow 450 for services below the structure, you're looking at a clear height of 3.2 meters. So I think it's a very, very poor quality public space. We talked about the basement, so I won't repeat it. Essentially, a refurbishment retains the existing basement. What's the consequence for an M&S occupation? Well, they can't do low ground floor retail, so they're going to be on several levels up the building. This is simply saying if you take their brief, which is 108,000 square feet, they're up into and including level 4 for their storage requirements. And this is just to remind you of the basement as proposed in the new building. None of that could exist in the refurb. And of course, we've left unsolved the really big problems, which are the dense column rates. They're still there. We've left unsolved the problems of misaligned floors at levels 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we've left unsolved the overall development potential of the site. Clear heights would be constrained again. This is taking a conservative assumption that we need 450 below the seals to give you 2.44. I agree, by the way, you wouldn't necessarily put a ceiling in, but this piece of servicing will be at that level compared to nearly 3 meters the underside of servicing in the proposed. And I think there's a wider question, one that Simon will be alive to, which is about the form factor of the building. And what's efficient, if you look at Letty guidance, is you want a really regular, compact, combined, deliver the most floor space in the most economical, regular envelope. Of course, a building constrained by the existing is a building that has lots and lots of perimeter. That perimeter is leaking heat in the winter and gaining heat in the summer. So it's not good urban design principles to have such an irregular shaped building on the site. So I guess to summarize, sorry I've gone so long, the existing building about 35,000 square meters, the proposed, which I think represents the needs of the site delivered, 61,000 or shade on 61,000 square meters gross, and a exemplary retail environment, securing M&S in the long term and making its contribution to the future prosperity of Oxford Street. Offices of the highest caliber meeting Westminster's goal for another 67,000 employment spaces within the international centre. The transformation of the quality of the public realm that would be entirely undeliverable in the context of any refurbishment, be it light or current car, an absolute step change in the quality, an enhancement to surrounding conservation areas, including is here, the Portman Estate Conservation Area, and the restoration of decent environment for Hested House, and a building that will complement the fantastic architecture of Daniel Burnham's Selfridges department store. I think that should have probably done and probably overdone. So thank you for your patience.
Can I make a suggestion, sir?
Yes. Do you have a few more questions?
No, I don't.
Okay.
But I do think it's appropriate that all of us spend a little time with the model.
Yeah.
But that might be the best thing to do after a break, given that we're at 11:30. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll break now. I think the programme suggests half an hour, maybe 20 minutes would be enough, but we'll see how long it takes to get in and out of the building and
There's a very good planting list upstairs.
Oh, is that? All right. Thanks for that. Can I use the stairs?
Yeah.
Splendid. Okay, so 25 to now, we'll adjourn until 5 to 12.